Hello everybody, my name is Hansa Karimski and thank you for tuning in to this quick and easy 3-part guitar lesson in which we're going to cover free-form legato tapping technique, sounding something like this. Now, in the first part, we're going to look at the very basics of tapping. We're going to build a simple tapping pattern, and by looking at some practical examples, we're going to discover the techniques we need to make sure our tapping is clear, concise, and cutting through the mix. Now, in the second part, we're going to continue on with practical examples and learn how we can manage string crossing and movement across the guitar neck whilst continuing to apply our tapping technique. Finally, in the third part, we've prepared a very short closing piece for you that allows you to test out all the technical things you've learned in a musical context. This piece is also accompanied by a backing track provided for you at 3 different tempos so that you can build up to the speed you want comfortably and easily. Of course, once you're done with the piece, you can also use these tracks as jam tracks as well. Finally, it's worth mentioning that everything we're going to cover in this lesson builds on from the content covered in Tapping Discovery, which is a book we released last year with GMI. So if you like how the lesson is laid out and you like the content and would like to know more, then please do consider checking out this book because it covers the very basics of tapping and then builds up to some pretty intense improvisation that can be quite useful to you. So I hope you're excited. I really do hope you like the lesson. And here we go. This is free-form legato tapping technique. Alright guys, welcome to part 1 of the free-form tapping technique lesson. In this part we're going to look at 5 examples that will outline some basic techniques we need to make sure our tapping is clean and precise. So let's get to it. Alright guys, so let's start by understanding what really makes up a tapping pattern. Now I like to think that tapping patterns are built out of 3 techniques. We've got a tap, we've got a pull-off, and a hammer-on. Tap is executed by what's usually the strumming hand, and the fretting hand tends to do the rest of the work. Now what makes these techniques quite powerful is the fact that they don't take a lot of effort to execute. So it means we can sequence them and put them as many as we really want in an order to create a whole bunch of notes. So in this first exercise, let's just try and put these 3 into a sequence and execute them one after another. So we're going to tap, we're going to pull off, and then hammer on. Now you'll also notice in the exercise I've annotated what I call outer leading finger and inner leading finger. And I've done this because it's very important to stay organized and aware of where you are in your tapping pattern in order to not fall out of time. So you can think of the 4th finger as the outer leading finger, whereas the 3rd or the 2nd finger are the inner leading fingers. So let's start by doing this pattern and starting off with the outer leading finger. So we're going to tap, pull off and hammer on with the pinky. And then again, making sure I'm balanced. Each note, the tap, the pull off, and the hammer on are all of equal duration. And then let's do the same with the inner leading. And then in sequence with one another. And once we feel comfortable, we can try and slowly speed it up. And then just a little more. And those are the basic building blocks of a tapping pattern. Right, so in the second exercise, we're gonna kind of start tapping into why we call this a free-form legato tapping technique. If you notice in the first exercise, we were tapping and then jumping over our inner and outer leading fingers to jump to the finger that was basically anchoring the whole sequence. But we want more of a legato run whilst we're doing this type of technique. So in this next exercise, instead of jumping between the fingers, let's connect all of them in one line. So we're going to tap, then pull off to our outer leading, pull off to our inner leading, in this case the middle finger, and then pull off to our anchor, and back up again with 2 hammer-ons. And again, making sure that everything is of equal duration. Now in this exercise, it's a good opportunity to talk about another concept that's sort of a basic technique we need to execute tapping. And that is how we basically position our thumb on the guitar neck. So if I rotate a little bit, you want your thumb not to sit over the top or to sit too low. You want it to sit in the middle of the guitar neck. Now, the reason for that is because it gives you the most, it gives you a position of strength and allows you to really hammer on and pull off with confidence. So if I was up top and I was trying to do this, I would have to sort of twist my hand, get there. I mean, I can still manage, but it's not very comfortable. And as we want to build longer runs, we want to be comfortable. And if I'm too low, it's the same. So just make sure you hold the thumb in a good position, straight, halfway on the guitar neck. And then focus on your pattern. All right, the next concept we're going to cover is a tricky one. These are called hammer-ons from nowhere. And they're an essential part of the technique we're going to build in these lessons. This is basically when we don't start our sequence with a tap, but rather we start with a hammer-on. And the reason it's tricky, but very useful, is that basically we need to get a string resonating without plucking it in any way, either with a tap or with a plectrum or any of our fingers. So we want to basically hammer onto the string and get it resonating straight away. So you can just practice that at first. Hammer on with different fingers. And if it goes bad, that's completely okay. Or if you maybe hit 2 strings at once, there's all kinds of accidents that will happen with these things. But really test it out and make sure that you've got your thumb in a good position, because it will allow you to sort of attack the strings from a point of strength. And then the pattern that we're covering in 1.3 is the same as we've done in 1.2, but starting with the hammer-on. Now, of course, once you do the first hammer-on, the rest is easy because you're always pulling off to the note. So try and maybe just focus on the first run. And if you're happy with that, then that's a good place to be. Because if it's weak, you won't get the rest of the pattern resonating very well. So really make sure that first attack point is strong. Moving on, let's try a little bit of string crossing. So if we revisit how we sequenced the pattern in 1.3, we started with a tap, followed with a couple of pull-offs, and then ran back up. So this time, let's try and move on to the next string. There. And then following along. So we're combining some of the components we've learned already. We've got a tap, the basic building blocks, tap, pull off, hammer on. We've got our thumb in the good position, and now we need a second hammer on from nowhere to get onto the next string. And then when we're going back to the first string, we need another hammer on from nowhere. So we've got one here, and then moving down, We've got another one there. And then we try and run that sequence. Now, if you noticed, during that pattern, at one point in time, I got another string resonating. And this is another concept where we need to discuss. Muting is an essential part of doing good tapping technique. Because we're obviously sort of focusing on really specific points of the guitar neck, and a lot of the strings, they're not doing any work. But because we're attacking the neck of the guitar with these hard hammer-ons, we're going to get the body of the guitar to start shaking and eventually resonating. So your tapping hand is not only going to be doing a lot of tapping, but it's going to be controlling the rest of the strings as well. I like to rest my hand right here on the top of the neck, and I sort of use how much I tilt my hand, as you can see, to cover the string. So if I'm up here, I'm not muting anything, and then as I move down, you'll see that I'll start and cover more and more strings. So when I'm here on the top string, I've basically got my hand almost completely vertical, to make sure that the rest of the strings are covered. And I can do a test. I can hold this position and then pluck these strings just sort of freely to see where am I sitting. So try out different positions and see how each one feels. And you might overdo it. You might start muting the first one. You might get the rest resonating as well. So it's all about practice. And finally, in exercise 1.5, we're going to again reverse the pattern and start off with a hammer-on from nowhere, and then do the sequence we were just practicing. Now, the important thing to think about here, and this is the last theoretical concept we're going to discuss, is that in freeform tapping, we're not forcing the note that's being tapped to land on a specific beat. Most commonly, we can think, as we were doing the patterns before, is if it falls on every strong beat in the bar. That makes it quite comfortable for the ear because we're always pulsing the same way. But in freeform tapping, we're going to sort of start moving around the guitar neck, and the tapping finger is always going to fall on a different note. So in this exercise, with it falling on the weak beat, try and listen out if you're really following the subdivision, making sure that all notes are the same and you're not sort of pushing the pattern to land on a specific point that your ear would probably want to push it to. Yeah, so make sure everything is balanced and that each note is of equal value, including the tapped one. So this is part 2 of the free-form tapping technique lesson. In this part, we're going to look at 10 examples that will show us how we can start crossing strings and moving across the guitar neck whilst executing tapping. So here we go, part 2. So let's start off with a bit of a revision exercise just to take all those elements we covered in lesson 1 together. Starting with exercise 2.1, we've got that sequence. So we've got a couple of hammer-ons from nowhere. Remember your muting position, remember your thumb position at the back, and remember that those hammer-ons need to be firm. And then we just speed it up a little. And remember, we're not being thrown off by the fact that the tapping move is landing on maybe a beat that we wouldn't expect. We're not starting the pattern with a tap. Okay, so we've got that down, so let's move on. Let's try and move vertically then. So we're gonna first start off by moving from the top string to the bottom string. All right, so we're gonna go. moving down, I'm opening up that the muting of the tapping hand. I'm doing strong hammer-ons. I'm adjusting my hand position to tackle the shape of the scale. And then I'm done with the pattern. So let's try it together. And this is, I wanted to show you an exercise you can do to kind of practice your free form, not being thrown off by the fact that the tapping is landing differently than you think. So we can try and play the pattern and count along as well. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So we try and play along as we count. It's good to count out loud. It's a good challenge for you, but you can also tap along. Helps you keep in time, helps you stay aware of where you are in the pattern. All right, so now let's change that up and try the same thing, but starting with a hammer-on first, hammer-on from nowhere. So again, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. So there we've got that. And now naturally, once we've got the movement down, the next thing to try is to move upwards. So we're going to move up into a little bit of a different position here. And we're going to do this. So that's the pattern there. And again, we can try counting. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. And then again, starting with a hammer on this time. Same pattern going upwards. Practicing with the count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. All right, so now we've met that challenge. We've moved down and up. So let's try and combine both of those together. So we're gonna go. Now when I reach this point, I'm going to change to the pattern I used to move downwards. Right, and this is going to land on beat 3. So if we count that along, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. Yeah, feel free to tap along or sing along, count along as you're doing this. Pulse is really important with tapping patterns, making sure that you've got that flow. Part of that is definitely just ensuring that there's a pulse. So feel free to practice with that. Okay, so let's try now move from the top string to the bottom string and then back up again. And this exercise we're going to do is going to help you kind of feel what it feels like going there, back, there, back. So let's move into the position we were before and let's do this. We're going to go. Again, landing on beat 3 there. So we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there we've got a nice little flowing movement, there, back, there, back. So we can change that up just a little more by creating a sort of shorter closed loop of a pattern that repeats and sort of slips, the end of it slips back into the start of it. So in the next exercise, let's do this. Let's go. So far, everything that we're familiar with. And then we're going to go and then restart. So we've got a closed loop like that. And we can kind of spin that over and over again. So we can now try and challenge ourselves further and introduce an element of horizontal movement as opposed to just vertical. And this part gets sort of even more tricky, not only because we're sort of changing positions and having to orient ourselves in new positions of the scale we're following, but also because the tapping will fall even more in places where we're not expecting it. So keeping track of that subdivision is ever more important. So the exercise goes like this. And we'll slide into the new position. That again lands on beat 3. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you can try that in your own time, find out the bit that feels most uncomfortable, and just try and count over that section over and over again, and eventually it will become just sort of second nature. You just want your fingers to completely ignore what the tapping note and what the fretted note is. Everything should just be in one sequence. So finally, we can look at a concept that we explore further in Tapping Discovered, which is sort of blending a couple of scales together. So far, we've been doing patterns that have been following just the A major scale. But what if we sort of started hinting at different scales to try and spice up our harmonic cocktail, if you were? So let's try and mix the A major pentatonic scale with the A major scale. Pentatonic scales are great because they tend to sort of happen very vertically on the guitar, which means for tapping it's great because it's easier to follow shapes as opposed to having to jump around. So in this final exercise, we're going to do a loop that sounds like this. And then repeats again. So that beginning, we're kind of hinting at being right here. A major pentatonic scale, where it happens to occur on the 7th and the 9th fret or 10th fret sometimes. So we're kind of just pulling off, crossing strings that way, and then following with what we know, hammer on from nowhere, and then continuing through. And then a little bit of element of legato there at the end that we already know from the other exercises. So that's the end of lesson 2. Thank you so much for sticking around for all the practical exercises. I hope they were helpful. I hope they can get you moving around the guitar neck, tapping away. And if you do want to test out all these things we've tried in a musical context, then stick around for part 3 when we have the closing piece. So we finally also reached part 3 of the freeform tapping technique lesson. In this part, you're provided with a closing piece that lets you put all the technical elements together and try them out in a musical context. Remember, you've also got the backing tracks you can play along to. Thank you again for joining us for this extension of Tapping Discovered. I hope you've liked the content and enjoy this final piece.